Have everybody's attention. I'm Gene Burnett. I'm co-chair of the Economic Development Committee. You can't hear me?
This is for recording, not for amplification.
I've never had somebody say they can't hear me. So welcome this morning. As I said, I'm co-chair of the Economic Development Committee. We were the impetus in getting this process started. Just as we get started, I'd like to get a quick show of hands. How many people here are on the working groups that we started? Great. So there's a good many people that haven't been involved in the process before, which is fantastic. The whole idea of what we're trying to do here is get community engagement and public input on what the next 30 to 50 years of the Upton Center will look like. There are some immediate challenges before us, but the overall concept is to take control and be proactive about what we're seeing with the center of the community. And that requires public engagement and public support. So your input is what shapes the vision. So the more people that are involved in shaping the vision, the more it will reflect the actual values of the community, which is critical, which will, for the next step of this process, which will be a possible change in zoning to support the vision that you guys are influential in creating. So I really would like to encourage you to engage as much as possible, to be good listeners to what other people have to say, but feel free to contribute and don't hold anything back. If you have an opinion, please voice it. Don't wait until we're at town meeting or at a zoning vote to voice your opinion. Voice it now so that what we do come up with reflects what you want. So with that, I'd like to introduce one of our selectmen to tell you a little bit about his feelings about this process.
Thanks everybody for coming today. This is obviously a huge commitment, spending time on a Saturday to participate in an exercise that's so important for the community. Getting your input, getting your feedback, getting your buy-in, most importantly having you come to the town meeting, share your opinion there is going to be really important. We hope to build, and what the Economic Development Committee's been working towards is gathering as much input as possible, getting as much feedback from the community as possible, so your words, your perspective is the most valuable part of the day today. You're going to see a lot of things that have been created, but don't be biased by that. Don't be afraid to bring in new ideas, new concepts. Reflect on what's there, but also think to yourself, is there something missing? Is there something else I want to see? Because every time we get a new person, we get a new perspective, we can, the Economic Development Committee, the vision can adapt to that. So I encourage you to actively participate. The fact that you're here is absolutely wonderful, so thank you so much, and enjoy the day, and I look forward to hearing as I go around what everybody has to say. So thank you, and thank you, Gene, for having me.
I guess I've met a lot of you. My name's Peter Flinker. For those that are new, welcome. Thanks for coming. I beg your indulgence in the acoustics of this room, not making it very easy. We're going to be breaking into groups, and there's going to be a lot of noise. So I just hope that you'll bear with us. It's one of the benefits of having a big turnout is we'll get a lot of input, but obviously it's going to be a challenge. So I guess in terms of what we're going to do today, you all have the agenda which was on the table in the back. Basically, we're going to introduce some of the information that we've learned about Upton Center over the last couple of months. We're going to do that in the format of the 7 different sort of theme groups that we're going to be breaking down. We'll sort of identify these key themes and ideas like traffic and parking and open space and the library and community center. And so for each of these, we're sort of collecting information and then trying to figure out what are the key things we need to know to make good decisions about that particular theme. And so that's what I'll be talking about for the next 40 minutes. And then at 11 o'clock, we're going to break into the first of 2 sort of station group sessions. So we're going to ask you to pick a station and go to that table and participate in some exercises led by some members of the working group or members of our team. And then at 11:45, we're going to ask you to switch to one additional station. So, big idea is we're going to have 7 different places where you can go, but you'll only be able to go to 2 of them this morning. And so we're going to ask you to sort of pick your top 2, and hopefully it'll all work out perfectly. But again, it's going to be very complicated and messy at those transitional moments, so I hope bear with us. And then we're going to have lunch, a delicious lunch of sandwiches from the Country Super. And then we're going to have each group sort of present what they heard in the morning session. And then after that, we're going to reconvene and sort of recombine the different groups and try to figure out what it means and how we move forward. And at 3 o'clock, we'll be done and know everything about everything, right? Right, so we've been dithering about whether there was time today to take a walk, because it's really useful for people to actually go and look together at different features. So what we're going to do at 3 o'clock, when we finish with the official workshop, whoever wants to hang out and walk around with us will do that and go look at some of these key places that we've been talking about all day. So that's the agenda for today. Any questions? Again, congratulations for showing up and having such a commitment to your town and to Upton Center, and we hope that we can take good advantage of your time today. I apologize, it's kind of lighted. You can all see that. The working group come to the and that working group has met twice already. And of facts that with. Yes. It's not too late to join the working group. How would you do that? I would talk to Jean.
We'll have a sign-up sheet, and what you do is put down your information, telephone number, email contact, that kind of thing, so we can engage you in the next working group session.
Right. So we're really at the centerpiece of this process, aiming at a presentation at town meeting, May 2nd. So the first couple of working group meetings, we're really talking about, what do we know about this place? And as we go forward, we'll be thinking about what are the alternatives for the future? And then how can we make a decision about what alternative seems to satisfy the most of the goals, the shared goals of the community. So I think a lot of you have been concerned about what's happening in the town center over the last few years. A lot of ideas get put out there. The whole purpose of this is to bring all the different groups together and think about what is the need of each of the different groups in the town, what are the goals of economic development and housing and community life, and how can we satisfy all of those goals within this place. So that's the purpose of this rather large and somewhat cumbersome process. But as Jean alluded to, what we're trying to avoid is coming to town meeting with a good idea that people vote down because they haven't been involved in the process. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on great plans that didn't go anywhere because people weren't involved. So we're trying to come up with a great plan and then also have all of you stand up at town meeting and say, yes, this is where we want to go. So as Jean said, if you have objections, raise them now and at the subsequent working group meetings so we can come forward with a plan that really makes sense. So these are the sessions. I'm going to sort of present some basic information around each of these session themes. So the first one we're calling Modeling a Master Plan. Some of you saw the model. We did a study model of the center that we're going to be thinking about how do particular buildings and open spaces fit into this place in terms of physical improvements and space between the buildings, space for people. We're going to talk a second station, which will be in the corner over there with all those pictures, which will be about strategies for architecture and historic preservation and public space. And this is really thinking about what do we want the buildings to look like? How do we conserve and preserve the buildings that are here if they're worth saving? Which ones are worth saving? Which ones should be replaced, etc. The third one, we're going to talk about traffic and parking and streetscape improvements. The fourth one will be about open space and pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. The fifth one will be about economic development and marketing and branding. The sixth one will be about sort of the social life of the center. How do all of these things add up, and what kind of activities do we need in the center? And then finally, ideas for a new... Taking everything that we learned in those first working group meetings and thinking about what are the big questions and the big ideas, and we've broken those down. So I'm going to go through each of those. One, this is from another workshop, but we basically have photographs of the existing buildings in the town center, and we're going to ask you to look at those and say, which buildings do you really love, or which part of preserving? Also, we have photographs from other places. This building would be a great fit for the town center, but this one would be a terrible fit. The buildings is how do we preserve what's best about Upton's past? How do we preserve this incredible sense of place you have to drive into the center, but still allow for growth and change over the next 200 years? And so part of that is trying to understand how the place has evolved over time. This is the 1888 bird's eye view of the center, when there were a lot more buildings sort of crowded around this place. Still had, here's the Common, and the Congregational Church, and the Old Catholic Church, and the Methodist Church, which is now the library. But it was literally a town square, and the road sort of came to it, right? Notice it. So the question is, what's remaining? Am I getting out of the view?
No, what's happening is the mic goes dead when you stand over here.
Oh, no kidding.
Stand there, it works fine. I don't know why.
All right. Mysteries of the technology. So now is the result of hundreds of years of architectural decisions, individual decisions, people having businesses, living and working in the center, and then interacting with this particular, with a pond and a stream going right through the middle of it, with roads that are connecting in odd ways, and this sort of topography of the hills that really determined where those roads and streams were. So you have all of it still. So the question is, how can we recreate, or do we want to recreate more of the conditions that were there 150 years ago when this was entirely in place? How can we hold on to the rest of those traditions and still accommodate people who are going to continue to arrive by car? And then again, how do we celebrate the sort of development and the resources that were created here over time? And so this question for this group is, what are the things we want to hold on to? Which buildings are precious? Be models? Which places are precious and for places and new connections? And then how do we think about the change over time? This is really interesting. In 1919 versus 2019, the church is still there. This building has gotten shorter or was rebuilt over time. We're not quite sure. So basically we have these two buildings, but they're different than the buildings that were there. But you see a trolley, the streetcar, and then the town common. And we also want to be cognizant of the work that's been done over the last decades by the Historic Commission. Is it commission or society? Both. The Historic Commission, the Historic Society has been working hard to show people what's special about the history of Upton Center, and they've created a local historic district that comes up to where we are here. Here's the town hall and the pond, and includes part of West Upton. So the question is how, what does this mean for the future of the town? And does features beyond this, do we care about them as much? What do we do about them? Do we want to extend the historic character that's here now, or what? So all interesting questions. So here's some of the discussion questions for this group for architecture and historic preservation. I'm trying to keep these pretty straightforward. So which buildings need to be preserved to maintain the sort of integrity and the sense of place of Upton Center? Which ones are the best precedents for future redevelopment? Like what could we model a new building on? And then what are some examples of buildings and public spaces from other towns that you might have seen that you think are good fits? And that's sort of be prompted by the pictures that we have up on the walls. So that's the first group. The second group is what we're calling design strategies for traffic and streetscape. And this again is sort of, we have this historic center that started out totally just pedestrians and equestrian, and now it has 9,000 cars coming through it, 12,000 cars in West Upton, 10,000 going up toward Grafton. So a lot of traffic every day. Not super steady traffic, but regular traffic, which is good if you have a business that's dependent on people going by. Not so good if you're trying to cross the street at rush hour. So this group will be thinking about, where are the places that need to be fixed? How do we sort of slow people down but not slow them down too much? Trying to figure out how much is enough. Here's a map of vehicle crashes between 2007 and 2016. And here's Upton Center with fairly small number of crashes, much larger number where you have the larger traffic and the perhaps more complicated intersections. I mean, it's interesting that where you have a traffic light in West Upton, you have more crashes, which is counterintuitive. But it's also something which we see a lot around the state, where if you have a really complicated intersection where people don't know what to do, they'll slow down and actually pay attention and move slowly. Whereas if you give them a green light, that's all they see. So we heard a lot about traffic issues and crosswalk locations and places that need more parking at the earlier workshop, so we can talk more about that with that group. We also want to be cognizant of there's some active processes of looking at transportation improvements. One was a so-called complete streets prioritization plan that was done last year, which sort of affected the side streets off of 140, and then 140 itself is on the transportation improvement plan, which is a regional transportation plan coming up for 2021 for some improvements. So the takeaway from this is that there is movement underway to make improvements to the roads in the town center, and so what we want to do is figure out how we can best influence those to create the center we want instead of the center that somebody else thinks you need, right? So this is some of the work from the Complete Streets Plan, where they talked about closing off some of the pavement and making pedestrian space in front of the old Catholic Church, improving sidewalks around the common, etc. Pretty much common sense improvements. So what we want to do is really focus at this working group onto where the most improvements are, and maybe thinking a little bit beyond the box. What would happen if we put in a roundabout and change the comment? I'm already getting some eye rolling about the idea of roundabout. So that's what we want to hear too. Whether it's, does that destroy the center because it changes the common, or does it help the center because it slows everybody down and makes them sort of stop and pay attention? I don't know. But that's an idea. Realigning streets or reconnecting intersections in different ways we want to talk about. So really the purpose of the meeting today and over the next month is really think about all the different crazy ideas that we can, and then be able to sort those into categories like this may be worth further investigation, or this is never going to go anywhere. But again, what we want to avoid is coming to town meeting and having somebody stand up, hold up a plan and say, well, I've come up with this plan and it's really good, And in fact, that's a really good plan that we didn't think of. So we want to think of the good and the bad now, so we don't get surprised later. So some of the questions for the traffic and streetscapes group: problems and the most dangerous. Which streets need to be improved with sidewalks and lighting, street trees, and so on. Best configuration of streets for. So some of the streets have sidewalks, some don't, but it's kind of a hodgepodge right now. So what we're going to try to think of is, like, for Main Street, do we want to have parking on one side or both sides with or some other Grove Street? Do we want to have sidewalks or on-street parking there, or keep it narrower? So that's the kind of thing we want to sort of go through each of those streets and figure out what our goals should be. The next group is the open space and recreation and connectivity. So this is looking down at the center, and you see the Mill Pond and Pratt Pond and the town beach and the cemetery. So this is the place that we're talking about, but obviously connecting to this stream corridor and to the ponds is very important. Connecting to all of the surrounding forest is very important because we're part of this local ecosystem. And so the question is, how do we keep that ecosystem functioning? How do we keep those rivers, streams, and ponds healthy? And part of that has to do with what happens in the surrounding open space. And then also then provides opportunities to make physical connections for trails and so on. And a lot of you have been involved in town planning and open space planning, and you know how this works, right? If you can protect a greenway corridor to protect the water supply in a particular stream, maybe that's an opportunity to create a trail corridor that connects one neighborhood to another. And maybe there's an opportunity then to make that trail into a nature trail that people can learn about what they're seeing. Or it could be an art trail that connects one part of the center to another. There are lots of interesting ideas that come out of this idea of connectivity, moving beyond the auto, thinking about how do we connect people walking and biking. How do you get from your house out in these surrounding neighborhoods down to the center to go to some wonderful event? So key issue we've discovered is really the floodplains. Table on it. We also have a smaller by 17 map that's the official flood map, and your facilitators hope to help answer any questions. But the key thing is you can have two subsequent years, but a 1% chance that you're going to get that storm, which will flood this sort of central purple area. And then once every 500 years, it could flood this darker purple band on the outside. So essentially, this is the place where we can predict will be flooded in the future. And that includes the site of the Congregational Church and going up around that, and the Common itself. Has anyone ever seen the Common flooded? No. So this is based on topography and the sort of FEMA calculations of what could happen in the future, but it also is not completely accurate necessarily. So we don't want to get too bogged down in this, if you'll pardon the pun, but this is the most likely place for flooding, at whatever chance there is, but it is possible to change these maps through a process with FEMA, getting engineers and surveyors involved and figure out where the more accurate boundary is. So if we determine that certain places are more appropriate for development, we want to look more closely at the floodplain maps and perhaps adjust them. Yes? Right. So you just pointed out, Tom was saying that the Historical Society has photographs of flooding in the center. How long was that? In the 38 hurricane, there was 4 feet of water over the road. The pizza parlor. Pizzas that day. Right, so the dam may have changed things and the spillway configuration and so on. So that's why we may have to go back and look at those. In the 1940s? Right. So I guess this is something we want to talk about in especially the open space group a little bit later on. But what we're saying that in the 1940s and the 38 hurricane, there was 3 to 4 feet of water on Main Street. But the dam has changed since then. They've rebuilt the dam and the road. So probably the hydrological characteristics of that area have changed as well. So that's another reason that going forward, if we determine collectively that it makes sense to redevelop in Upton Center, we want to re-examine those flood maps. And it sounds like there may be reason to do that. So some of the questions, connectivity areas into larger patches of open space and greenways connecting along and recreation areas, and how are they used? What additional is needed? And then are there pedestrian or bicycle connections that should be made to make it safe to go to the center with outlying Upton. So Carrie's here from Central Mass Regional Planning Commission is going to be running one of our workshop groups to look at sort of economic development questions. Get too bogged down in all this is a summary. First, or Massachusetts households make more than $200,000 a year. So you're from a Massachusetts standpoint, you're a fairly affluent community and getting more affluent. Employment, most employment is outside of town. People drive an average of 34.9 minutes. I don't know how they determine that. Maybe they have GPSs installed in all your cars. But people drive more here to get to work than they do in the average community in Massachusetts. And then just 4.8 live below the poverty line. Still, poverty and issues associated with poverty are present in Upton. And that's a key question for the future is how do we take care of the people who are less advantaged in our community? How do we avoid gentrifying so much that even middle-class people can't afford to live here? And what is our responsibility as a community to take care of those that are less fortunate? This is interesting, a sort of workforce by industry in 2018. So a little over 4,000 people are working in the Upton population. Of those, 121 are working in Upton Center, and about 2,000 are working in Worcester County, which means that half the workers are going outside Worcester County to work, which is interesting. But quite a lot of jobs in manufacturing still, some in retail trade, professional workers, and then the biggest one is education and healthcare, which means patterns that we're seeing across the state is education and healthcare teams to drive the economy in a lot of places. Here's that income from 2009, an average of 102,000 up to 119,000 in 2017. And then this is one of the reasons we're here is that the Economic Development Committee has really been trying to figure out how to enhance the tax base in Upton so that your tax rate does not keep going up and up and up. So from 2009, it went from a little shy of 5,000 to something more than 7,000. And some of that is due to inflation. Inflation would have put it at about 5,500, and now it's up to 7,000. So it's growing. And then this is one of the reasons why is that the local tax levy, almost 95% of your taxes are based on residential open space uses, not on commercial industrial uses. So Westboro, only about 2/3 of their tax base is residential. Here you're 95%. So that's why your tax rate obviously goes up. For some of you, it may be fine. You don't want to see a lot of industry in town. You like being a quiet bedroom community and you don't mind. But obviously, expenses keep going up and your residential tax will go up so fast. So one of the reasons is that you do have this emphasis on residential use and residential taxation. Upton is kind of the hole in the donut. If you see this is a regional land use map. Here's Upton, here's the surrounding towns, here's 495 and Route 90. And these circles represent sort of the key Hopkinton. We talked about one in Westboro, and then Grafton. Retail is really good. Town center, so that means that the larger retail and office and industrial uses are not looking to locate in the center of Upton necessarily, because they need the access. Is fairly low. What's interesting is that the rental rate up here, which is about $10 per square foot on this line, it dropped a lot during the recession, but after the recession it's pretty much popped back up to $10 or $11 a square foot, but hasn't really risen, even though vacancy rates are very low. So what that means, I think, is that there's not a huge demand for that space. So we sort of used up what it is, but there's not enough of demand to drive the price of space up beyond $10 or $11 a square foot. And the key issue with this is that if you want developers to come in and build a beautiful new commercial building here in the center, they're not going to be able to do it at $10 a square foot, probably. The rental rate, I'm not sure if the vacant. So this is Carrie's group going to be talking more about the implications. So, and then so local trends, which we can map out, but these are part of national and regional trends, which I'm sort of categorizing as 100 years of change on. 150 years ago, Main Street was it, right? All of organically, you had shops and stores, community buildings, civic activities, and so on, as you do today. But basically, if you wanted anything, you had to go down. And then, especially after World War II, suburbanization happened, and you had a consolidation of retail systems. the A&P company basically invented the supermarket in the 1920s and 30s. And this whole idea of instead of going to your local general store and buying a sack of flour, you would go to the supermarket, leave your babies out on the street, and then go inside and pick, and it all worked. And then, we went from sort of supermarket as sort of consolidation of where you got your groceries and stuff to the super, shoppers, and shopping malls and super centers, which is where you got everything else. And this happened nationwide, worldwide phenomenon, basically driven by mobility, right? You could suddenly have regional centers where people could drive 50 miles very easily on the interstate to go. Across New England. Went to the mall. Today, what's happened is the change going forward. This is from 1992 to 2017, a plot of the blue line is department stores as a percentage of retail sales, going from 15% down. Sears and consolidating Macy's and everything else. Meanwhile, warehouse stores, the blue line, has gone from 5% up to 15%. Electronic and online shopping has gone from less than 5% up to more than 15% in percentage of retail sales. So we're all part of this, right? It's so easy to go to the big store in Milford, get all your supplies. You save a few bucks, and you go home. It's so easy to go online and get stuff. So we're not changing this because it is a more efficient way to get the goods and services that we want. Here's another plot of internet sales between 1995, 5% going up, department stores flattening out. And then what's interesting on this one, this line is eating out between 1995 20% up to 50%. So this is another thing that's happened in the last 30 years. You no longer have, well, I think from my own experience, when both members of a couple are working, you don't want to come home and cook every day. So that means a couple times a week you go out to eat or you order in. For a lot of people, that's every day. But certainly in my life, we went from never going out to, we go out. And the fact is, it's cheaper, as you know, to go to one of your local places often and get a sandwich than it is to go to the store and make that sandwich yourself. So the market is responding to the need in society to have convenient, good food. So we're having higher quality, cheaper prices, and of course the convenience. So that's going to continue. News for the big box stores like Sears, but what's happened coming back to the suburbs, down in Kingston, Rhode Island, of developers looking at the marketplace, looking at the different mix of uses that they're predicting in the future, and seeing that's going to be a mix of uses that is going to drive rental prices. So it's in apartments on the upper floors. Shops are primarily driven by play, like getting your nails done, your hair, or your dog. So that's the stuff that's suburban development now. So-called lifestyle centers popping up all over the place. The good news for Upton Center, right, here's the bottom line. The good news for Upton Center is you have the original lifestyle center right here. You used to have all of these goods and services, a mix of housing and civic uses and commercial uses and industrial uses, all within walking distance. And you could have that again in the future if you want to. And the market is driving toward now. So all of those things, you used to be the hole in the, or maybe today you're the hole in the donut with the retail out by the highways, but those retail areas are going to shrink as internet and other influences rise, and you have the opportunity to refill this donut hole. Very tasty. So here's the which is talking that means economic trends with bring people to the Upton Center, and should we expand housing opportunities, and where would that happen, and what kind of housing do we need that drive activity? This is a chart of Upton's population from 1930, around 2,000, to 2017, almost 8,000. 1980. So it basically doubled between 1930 and 1990, and then doubled again from 1990 to today. But your household size is about 2.7 people. About 3/4 of those are in family households as opposed to non-family households. And that household size is dropping across the state the last 50 years. So we don't need the big, 3-4 bedroom houses anymore, necessarily. And then, of course, as you know, Upton is primarily 96-point-some% white, and a mix of other minorities, including a growing share of Asian residents. Questions for this group is, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing for the town to encourage diversity, and how do we do that? How do we, again, take care of people who maybe don't fit in the town right now, but could enhance what we have here today? All those questions. This is an interesting age groups. This is each so-called cohort from 0 to 4 years of age, 30 to 34 years of age, 50 to 54 years of age, going up to 80 and 85 years of age. But the blue is where the bulges are now. This bulge is the so-called baby boom. So largest proportion of residents right now are between 35 and 55 years of age, which is actually a little bit behind the baby boom, strictly speaking. And then you have a bulge of kids in the 0 to 19 years. And then the open cells here are where it's projected to be in 2030. So this age group is going to get older, and the bulge is going to move further, become older, and then the number of kids is going to shrink and sort of flatten out. So this again is a trend that's occurring nationwide across the state as the population will get older, fewer children per household, and so you have a result in terms of school enrollment. Between 2008 and 2018, the enrollment has gone from 1,500 down to around 1,200 in the Upton schools, and this is where it's projected to go. Here we are, this line is that drop of enrollment from 2008 to 2018, and it's basically going to be flat for the foreseeable future. So we're happy families. Some of you are here today. That's great. But not the numbers that we had them after World War II. So we're not going to be growing a lot in population, but probably going to be steady. So some of the questions for this group will be, what kinds of destinations can really bring life to the center? What kind of amenities do we need in terms of things that support the bike racks and planters and gardens and street lights? are needed and appropriate in the center. So this is the last group, stairs, which is thinking about ideas for a new community center library. And this is what you'll hear from this group. Going back many years of thinking about how can we and way below what it should be for a population of Upton's size. It works pretty well. It's got great staff, great programs, but for many years they've been thinking about then there's a parallel process with trying how can we make it a real center the two together, some proximity, so that the people visiting the library, the senior center, and the and I think the obvious conclusion, which we're exploring through this process, is that could we have that in Upton Center, bring the senior center and make it into a larger community center, bring it together with the library, and use that as kind of the seed crystal that will really grow the rebirth of Upton Center economically and socially. So as we'll see looking at the maps, there's not a whole lot of space, but there is enough space, I think, to do everything that we want to do. And so what we want to hear from you today with this group is how can we really, what kind of needs and adjacencies really would benefit these different uses as they come together. These are some of the plans for renovation of building. Years ago, that building could be renovated. So some of the questions is what you like about the existing services and facilities that these programs would you like? And does it make or have them in some kind of does it make sense? To know exactly how it could fit in Upton Center, but what we're really trying to do today is brainstorm all the reasons for or against from a sort of a larger town life perspective. Yes, ma'am.
There's only so much you can do, and it has to be in an incremental and step-by-step basis, right? So the glaring need of the town right now is if you envision if nothing is done in the downtown center, what's the consequence to the community and the view of the community of a continually declining downtown center? It's actually degrading each year as we go by. We haven't seen it improve in 30 years. We've seen it get worse in 30 years. And that trend is continuing unless we take definitive steps to change it. economic development, as you point out, does not occur in a vacuum. We have to look at the whole context. The Economic Development Committee, that's its mission, is to look at the broader context. This is only the beginning of a